Welcome everyone to today's Prairie Public Weekly Web Chat. I'm Darcy Backegaard, and I am so giddy with excitement to talk to this collection of teachers about how they implement and use mentor texts to better support student writing. So we'll get started and just have everyone introduce yourselves. Who are you? What do you teach? What has brought you to this conversation? Kelly, will you start us off?
Sure. I'm Kelly Saucy. I'm director of the Red River Valley Writing Project, and our mission is to support the teaching of writing from kindergarten all the way through college in all subject areas, not just English. I was a high school English teacher in Alaska, and I'm now associate professor of English and education at NDSU.
Hi, my name is Jasmine Rinke. I teach a few classes over at Davies High School in Fargo, North Dakota. I teach an English 1 classroom, so mostly freshmen, but some older students, an English Learners 4 classroom, so a lot of new Americans, refugee students, and then I also teach exploring journalism, journalism 1, and journalism 2, all smushed together in one class. So,
Liz, where are you joining us from?
I'm from Fargo, North Dakota here at Bennett Elementary, and I teach 3rd grade. This is my 26th year of teaching, and I've been in back in Fargo for the last 16 years. Before that, I was in Texas teaching in a little suburb outside of Dallas, Texas. And I've been in the National Writing Project 2 times, once in Texas 20 years ago, and then just recently, this last 4 years ago, just to kind of refresh and get acquainted with people here in the area in writing.
Wrapping up our panel of voices is Ben. Ben, tell us about yourself.
Yeah, my name is Ben Scallon. I teach 7th through 12th grade English in Lakota, North Dakota, which Lakota's probably got a population of close to 700 people, very rural. I think in the high school I've got about 68 students right now.
Thanks everyone for giving of your time and coming to join us to talk about mentor texts. I think the first thing that we want to just clarify and get out of the way is just what is a mentor text?
So if it's okay if I start, I just see a mentor text as a piece of writing, poetry, journalism, short story, just something that students can find a voice in. And use that story or writing to build their own writing. And so a lot of times it could act as a model, a mode of inspiration maybe, a study of genre, but it really is just something that they can use it as a key to navigate their own writing skills.
And at the elementary, we talk a lot about being mentors because we have mentors in the building. So we just kind of equate it with what does a mentor do? And 3rd graders will tell you that a mentor is someone who already knows how to do it, and they're allowing you to look at how they're doing and modeling it for you so that you can make some of the attempts that they're doing as well. And usually we talk about mentors are usually side by side. So they allow you to look at what they're doing, and then you get feedback on what is happening. And so that's how 3rd graders would explain what a mentor is to you.
I like that analogy. That's quite lovely. So a wide variety of things can be mentor texts.
Yes. Oftentimes using a mentor text, like Jasmine said, is used to teach rhetorical strategies. So if there's a new genre a student has never had exposure to before, by reading several examples of that genre and then identifying the patterns or characteristics that make that genre distinct, that can help a student then enter into their own writing. And Jennifer Fletcher writes about in this book called Teaching Arguments. I think Ben Scallon has been using this with the College Career and Community Writers program. Yep. So her approach is with that rhetorical strategies piece and mentor texts.
Knowing what a mentor text is, I'm just curious for each of you, your individual teacher journey, what was the impetus that inspired you or prompted you to bring mentor texts into the classroom? Was there a specific student challenge, a problem that you were seeing that students were struggling with an aspect of writing. What was it that really prompted you and motivated you to take the time to bring mentor texts into your writing instruction?
Well, for me, at the elementary level, I think it's important that kids see good literature, but also good writing. So it might not be something that we're necessarily doing at the time, but it's something to aspire to be able to do. And I think when you take a look at people who teach writing, especially at the elementary level, they feel like they're not very good writers to begin with. It's kind of one of those areas. It's not like math, it's not like reading, it's a gray area. So when you teach writing, you feel like you're in this gray area. And so when I did a lot of professional development, or when I worked with my own students, mentor text allowed us to be able to see that there were ways that we could work in our writing that allowed us to make these approximations or these attempts to change our writing or to improve in our writing. It was a model for us to follow if we weren't sure what we wanted to do to start off with. So that's how I brought mentor text into the classroom. And, you know, one of the most exciting things is to see kids when you ask them if they want to write, or if you miss time during that time and they ask you, are we going to make that up this afternoon, or are we going to do that later on? It really is an exciting thing to see kids excited about their writing and show that. So I think mentor text really opened that up for you, but also for teachers if they're unsure about teaching it in the classroom.
My first experience with mentor texts and just the idea of a text being a mentor in some way was actually in my undergrad degree in Kelly's classes, as well as like Dr. Kevin Brooks. He was a professor at NDSU. Before that, I hadn't really encountered or thought of text as being models for students. And so it was really nice to see a lot of the resources, and not just resources, but also research and experience from educators who do use mentor text, and to see their firsthand experiences with students, either improving their writing or, just like you said, Liz, making them excited to write and excited to read these different stories. And so luckily I was kind of able to take my experiences from my undergrad, and I'm in my second year of teaching, so it wasn't too long ago, but it was really nice seeing some of these resources that Kelly has given to many of her students, and use them in my own classroom. So I've always it's really nice since starting teaching last year. I've been able to implement mentor text right away. Of course, it's changing and evolving, and I change the text that I use and everything, but it's nice because there wasn't ever really a time where I didn't have mentor text. So I was just kind of been in there, again, with resources pulled from so many great places, from professors, other educators, like Kelly Gallagher, Penny Kittle. They just have a lot of really nice things out there. Exactly, the 2 books. And so there's so many resources, and I'm really fortunate as a young teacher to have these mentors as people to use mentor texts in my room. So,
Could I just add another to what Jasmine had to say? You know, mentor texts allow the real world to come to your classroom as well. It provides a lot of authentic opportunities for kids to be able to write. So when you use mentor texts, you as the teacher don't have to be doing your own writing all the time. You can use other writers to be able to show the possibilities of being able to do this type of genre writing, or whatever the format might be. But if you really think about, like, if you're applying for a position or applying for a job, well, if you haven't done a resume in a really long time, you go to the internet and find an example of a specific type of resume that you would want. And you use that as your mentor to figure out what you need to put in yours. And so that's really something that we are constantly always doing. So it makes sense to use it in the classroom and to teach young writers and to give them that opportunity to feel successful. And we want them to believe that they're writers. And so if they're modeling and mimicking and doing approximations in early development of language, that's what makes it successful. So that's what makes it successful in later years with writing.
You've alluded to this a little bit of where do you go to for additional writing support, and anyone who's listening in, all of the resources that we're discussing today are gathered together in a hyperdoc that is linked in the YouTube description. So feel free to jump on that. I'm gathering all these book recommendations, so they'll be right there for you. Where do you go to find mentor texts for your students? You've all made great points about the fact that this is a great way that if I, as a teacher, don't feel super confident of teaching X genre, by bringing in a mentor text, it's saving me time of having to try to figure out, and I can work with the students to decode this text and what are the requirements and expectations of this text. We can do that work together. So where do you go? What are some of your well springs for inspiration?
So I'll bring this book up. It's the 2018 Scholastic Art and Writing, well, Teen Writing, Best Teen Writing. But it's a collection of all the different types of writing that won at the national level from teenagers in the country. And so I take I haven't used these stories yet because I just got this back in December. But you can see just all the different types of writing that I'm hoping to use. And it's really nice, like with my English 1 class, we start short stories and nonfiction in the beginning of the year usually. And so I try, obviously we go through and we use just the sacred texts of certain classes. But then I also add some stories from the teen writing. And I really emphasize to students that, hey, this is a 7th grader who wrote this last year, and look what they can do. And really emphasize this is an authentic voice. It's an authentic idea that someone else your age has generated. And it really motivates them, because after the unit where we talk about nonfiction, fiction, rhetoric, different things like that, we go into a writing unit, usually narrative. And it really motivates a lot of students to say, okay, I just read a story where this 16-year-old used language in a way that I had never thought of. So if that 16-year-old in Tennessee can do it, well, why can't I do it in North Dakota? And they also really like what the writing is about. There's one story, I think it's not from the 2018 art and writing, but I think it's from 2015. And it's called Things My Mother Taught Me. And a lot of the girls and gender nonconforming students really like it, because it talks about issues of body image, things like appearance, expectations on gender. And at least at high school, a lot of students are starting to question at this time. So when they read a story written by a teenager about teenage things and issues, they feel more connected to it, and in my opinion, than with stories that are here's a story about a guy who encloses someone in a wall. So
some 40-year-old old man in a different country. And,
exactly.
Yeah.
And those are still good. You still want those so you can get a variety of genres and everything. I really like doing the scholastic part of the unit. And so I enjoy that part too. They just have so much fun with it.
I want to point out something about the book that Jasmine just shared with us. At the back of the book, there's this educator guide that the National Writing Project contributed. So the National Writing Project partners with the Alliance for Young Artists and Writers, and they're the nonprofit that puts on the Scholastic Art and Writing Awards. And since it's April and it's Poetry Month, I wanted to share activity 3 from the Educator's Guide. And so it's a really simple poetry activity that just invites students to write 2 poems, one that's a prose poem and one that has line breaks. And I would suggest, instead of going to a poem in the national one, to use a local, our local resource. So we also have the Best Teen Writing of North Dakota 2019 that just came out, right? We had the awards at Plains Art Museum during that last horrible snowstorm that we had. The couple of the award winners are on facing pages. So we have 2 poems, and you can just see from looking at them, one is a prose poem on the left, and then there's a poem with line breaks on the right. And the one on the left is called Perfection by Stacia Legacy. And she's from your high school, Jasmine Davies. And the one on the right is called 1,000 Eyes by a student named Ellie Mae Schultz from Red River High School in Grand Forks. And both girls are writing about body image and the pressure put on young women to be beautiful and the discrepancy between how they feel on the inside and how they look on the outside. And I just want to read the last stanza of Ellie Mae's poem, because I think that final line really has a profound statement. I'm not pretty and I'm not perfect. Maybe I'm worthless, but that's what I need to be. That's what I need you to see. I need you to see me. And I just feel that every student needs to be seen. And so I really appreciated Ellie Mae's message there. But reading these poems written by North Dakota students, inviting students to play around with 2 different poems and different form and structure is just something we could do during Poetry Month. And then if you want to know more about Scholastic Art and Writing Awards, you can also go to their website, which is right here, and find out about all the different categories to enter in. If you want to know which ones don't have as many entries as others, I can give you that scoop as well. So, and as long as I'm sharing my screen, here's our writing project site too. So we do share information about the ceremony. There's a video. If you didn't get to see the exhibit, you can click on the video, and then we also share student writing throughout the year here, and also the amazing things that teachers are doing.
That's fantastic. All of those links will be in that hyperdoc in the description. So if you want any more of that information, and if people have questions, they can reach out to you, correct, Kelly? If they have questions about any of the Scholastic Writing Awards or any of those things.
You bet.
So one of the things I find is interesting is that I think at an early age, we need to allow students to understand that they have a voice. And I think writing is one of those areas where kids get an opportunity to use their voice in a way that shows their thinking, shows their humor, shows just what they're thinking in the moment. One of the pieces of writing that I like to have with students is concern writing. So they get to write about things that they're concerned about. But just giving them an opportunity to have a voice, I think, is really important. And using these mentor texts is a great way to be able to give them that opportunity. So my job, I see, especially in the elementary level, is to be able to have students leave here at elementary feeling they have a voice and feeling a way of being able to have an outlet somewhere where they can put those different opinions and those pieces together in a way that people can see and hear their voices. So I just wanted to add that in there.
That's a really powerful gift that you're cultivating in them. Speaking of that, selfishly, I just want to hear what some of this, maybe like how this looks in your classroom. If you're willing to share some examples of maybe a specific text, a mentor text, and then a specific activity and or a specific assignment. What is the process? What does this look like, and how does it germinate in the actual classroom?
I use it to start like a genre study. So, and I think most of my thinking with that came from Nancy Atwell's In the Middle, which kind of seems to me like it's the mother of all these other books we've been talking about. because it seems like they all refer to it. But she uses the word marinating her kids in a genre. So like
That's
they'll
great.
spend like the first week just reading memoirs before trying to write them.
Yep. Yep.
And then they'll slowly work towards pulling out the features and, you know, breaking it apart. But I've kind of tried doing that with most genres I teach now, is doing something very similar to that. I spent a lot of time earlier in the year doing work with memoir. And I know Nancy Atwell talks a lot about something called a vignette, which is a series of short stories that work together to create a bigger story. So I might give kids the option to, when they're doing a memoir, maybe they could do a vignette if some of the things they're noticing about memoir isn't working for them. And I actually had a student who kind of did that, and she made her way into the Best Teen Writing of North Dakota this year. And I'm really, really excited to use her memoir as an example to students next year. I've already had a lot of students just asking to read her memoir since she's been published in that book, and it's been a really great experience for our school. I think it's really helping kids get confidence and know what they can do too.
I used some student examples from Davies High School as well. We've also had a few entries into Scholastic, and it's so nice to be able to say not just a 15-year-old from another state, but also like, this is someone who is still going to school here. And so two of the stories I use with students, one of them is called First Steps to Freedom. And that was written last year. She was in 9th grade. This year she's a 10th grader. That was written by Olivia Drake. And it's a phenomenal story. Like, she has a very strong voice. The imagery is just, it's so intense. And the words just kind of string together and fall together in a really almost poetic way, even though it is a short story. So when we are in short stories, and I tell students like, okay, we're gonna read something that was written by a 14-year-old girl from North Dakota, that usually perks their ears and they're like, wait, what? But it's also really nice too. Another story that I use, it's called Everything Can Change. And it's a story that was written by an EL student who submitted his work. And it's a really nice way, like a lot of times we talk about text as windows and mirrors and sliding glass doors. And so Everything Can Change is really a window for a lot of the students in my mainstream classes, because they don't realize that there are students in the building who have encountered like conflict and hardship on this level. And in this story, Everything Can Change, this young man who he just graduated last year, he talks about like losing his family to conflict and coming to a new country, like not having any idea of what's going on and not knowing the language. And so it's really nice using that text, not just as a way to model different like genres and rhetorical devices and everything, but to also offer students a way to see their lives reflected in their stories, or to see different perspectives in their lives that they maybe didn't consider. And again, these stories, they're available, like I think Kelly she held up the 2018 North Dakota Writers. There was a 2017 book last year. So that North Dakota book is so helpful. Like, it's just, students buy in when you have writing from other students, and they buy in even more if they have a connection to that student, like we go to the same school or I'm friends with that person. And it's just really cool to see us using those previous students' works to kind of inform our current students. And again, give them that message of, if these students could do it, you definitely can as well. Like, you are all very capable of being a mentor to the next generation or the next year that comes into class. So
the primary grades and the elementary grades, there's two authors I think that are fantastic, and one is Katie Wood Ray. She has a book that she has called What You Know by Heart, and it talks about developing curriculum for your writer's workshop and really just empowering students. That's a great resource to have. And then a second one just came out this last year. She had a book, was all about poetry, Georgia Hurd. She had a book all about different poems, awakening the heart, and how poetry can awaken the heart of students. And she came out with a book this year called Heart Maps. It looks like this. And Heart Maps is one of the books you could use it in any and every subject. We used it for our science. We used it for our social studies. We've used it for writing. We've used it in reading to analyze characters' traits, and analyzing that not all characters have all good hearts. Everybody has a little bit of a flaw or something that they're consumed with. We tie that in with art class, how you have light and you have cool and warm colors. So once we get done looking at the heart of a character, then we color the cool and warm parts of our character to get a visual of what it looks like.
I used that in college too, Liz.
I love
that book. I like to just use it for my own writing too.
Well, I have to admit, I've been using it for mine as well. But that's just one of my favorite books to be able to use. So poetry, when I use it in the classroom, I think one of the things about poetry is that kids are always exposed to poems that rhyme. And I talked with my students about how that's really a elementary school level type. I said, there's really more than just rhyming that goes with poetry. So I compare it to a clock, that a clock, if we divide it into its parts, there's from the 1 o'clock or the 1 to the 3 is rhyming poetry. The rest of the clock is all poetry that has nothing to do with rhyming.
I love that.
Nice.
So we talk a lot about that, because if you get elementary kids to rhyme, well, you get like the same word. They're trying forever to rhyme with block. And in other words, you're like, maybe we should go to a different word. So all my focus is on poetry strategies, noticing a poem of an author, what did they do in the poem, and then taking a look at, well, what could we take from that? What could we try in our poems? And I can give you a couple of examples. The beginning of the year, when I start with students, I use a poem. It's actually written by a 7th grader, and her poem is called Things to Do If You're a Dog. And it's a poem. All it is a list of things that the dog loves that she observed the dog doing. So we talked about that observing is a huge part of writing. And so she wrote this whole poem, and when the kids take a look at it, they realize that the poem is just a list of things she saw the dog doing, and all the lines start with a verb. So it's a verb, and then what's going on. So they use that poem to describe what to do, or things to do if you're Liz, or things to do if you're Kelly, or things to do if you're Jasmine. And then they think of things that if I was watching them, what would I observe them doing? So they introduce themselves at the beginning of the year to everyone in class by creating these poems. The other one that I just used is a poem called Song of March. And I cannot remember the author's name off the top of my head here. We just used that poem to tie in our science and poetry and observation. And we looked at seasons, we've looked at how weather, how nature changes things in our environment. Mm-hmm. And so we used that to talk about the month of March, which was March lent itself this year to that, because we had an awful start to March. And then after the 15th, while we had a wonderful end of the, all of the stuff started to happen, we could see grass again. So the students took a look at Song of March, and when you read the poem, you notice at the I didn't notice this about the poem, but when the kids talked about it, I thought, oh my gosh, I've taught them well, because I didn't even notice that, and they did. The beginning of the poem starts off really like aggressive and just rough. And we talked about that it's kind of different than the end of the poem, how the poem at the end is just kind of floaty and kind of slows down the tempo a little bit. And one of my students said, my mom says, in like a lion, out like a lamb. And I thought, oh my gosh, why did I not think of that? So when they looked at this poem, we weren't necessarily going to write a poem exactly like the author. We were going to use some of the strategies that the author had used in their poem. And so the author had used onomatopoeia, and the author had used couplets. We talked about, well, what would a couplet be? So we talked about those things, but we also talked about how the author was writing from a different perspective. They were writing from March's perspective, the month of March. So the kids used that to be able to write in their poems. They got to choose whatever they wanted to. Poetry for me is a way to get kids to experiment and explore.
I do have a question, because we've been talking about pretty Englishy uses of mentor texts. And I'm just wondering though, because there's a lot of creativity on this call, how might, and you alluded to this, Liz, actually, of how you blended this for different purposes, but thinking about that purpose, if I'm a science teacher or a math teacher, a social studies teacher, how might I weave mentor texts? What might that look like in my classroom? Or are mentor texts just for English teachers and just for creative writing?
Okay, I'm going to say mentor texts are not just for English teachers. Just, as a writing project person, we might have people from all different subject areas working together on writing, and they're definitely for different areas. And then my husband works at the Center for Writers on campus. Mm-hmm. And they have people of all different disciplines working as consultants for writing. And one of the things that they do, because students encounter, they have to do the kind of writing they've never done before in their life, right? When you go to write a thesis, you've never written a thesis before. And it could be in the sciences, it could be in any area. And so using mentor texts from the discipline to learn about, sort of what are the disciplinary expectations and so forth, that's really key. So mentor texts are really important for writing in different content areas in different disciplines.
So my significant other, he doesn't teach at Davies, but he is a science teacher in high school as well. And so he's brought in mentor texts of models of like lab reports or like write-ups based on animal behavior, stuff like that. But what I really admire about him, other than the fact that like he's super awesome and I love him, I'm gonna see if I can screen share. He's tried to bring in creative writing too, creative nonfiction.
Those science writers are so good at creative nonfiction.
They are, and so stories like The Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks, kind of going into not just writing to share information, but like what's the human aspect and element of information, and how do we present our information in a way that informs us of the world around us and improves humanity in some way. He also uses this book, it's called City Beasts, 14 Short Stories of Uninvited Wildlife by Mark Kurlansky. It's a bunch of short stories about essentially animals encroaching or maybe even taking back their territories. And he really opens it up to a discussion of how do the sciences and STEM, like how do they intermingle with humanity? Yeah. And it's just really, it's so cool to see how he connects it together. And so very much what you said, Kelly, it's not rigid, like mentor texts are only English, like they belong in math classrooms,
everywhere,
kids and social studies, like, and they can be used in so many different ways because it doesn't have to just be a short story or a journalism piece or a poem. Like it could be medical reports. If you have students who are interested in medicine, have them take a look at what those look like. Or if you have students interested in like philosophy or law or
Right.
all
I'm
those
even
different
thinking in a math class, why not bring in a lot of different infographics as mentor texts?
Yeah.
Right? Yes, we've been talking in statistics about how to create, polls, and like some charts, some basic charts. But let's look at how other people are using infographics to really illuminate and try to tell the story of the data that we're seeing. And I was talking to a science teacher just this afternoon, was talking about how one of the things that she makes her students do is she gives them a made up, she says that space aliens have brought us some chemical elements from their planet. You need to create the textbook chapter that those aliens would use to teach the chemical properties of those elements. So then they have to, using their textbook as a mentor text, they have to create a fake textbook that goes through what would be the types of science that you would need to know about these different alien experiments and these alien elements. But she said they're really applying all of the basic terminology that they've been studying, like the whole first kind of quarter, that this is a way for them to practice all of that in a fictional scenario in textbook form. But I love that example of so concrete of bringing in a lab report, right? If you're wanting your kids to write an article or an argumentative essay in social studies, well, show them some editorials and read some about what's going on right now and bring in different perspectives and analyze what are those voices doing and saying.
I think it's sometimes a little bit harder at the elementary level. I have them all day for science, social studies, math. And I see elementary as it's easier for me to be able to tie these things together because they all interweave. And as an elementary teacher, I have to show them how the information's connected. We talk about their brains. Your brain is a computer, but if I don't tell you where that information goes, it's information that gets lost and put in the trash and then you never see it again. So we have to take it to a file or to some bit of information so that you can use it again. So when we talk in science about habitats and we talk about weather changes and how humans can change an environment, how weather or natural disasters can change it, then using that information in your writing, you can take whatever you started in science and move it into writer's workshop. So all of that can be working together, not necessarily making more work for you, but it allows you to start and really talk about the concepts or the content that you want to, and then moving it into something else.
Yeah.
And I would think it would be harder at the secondary level because you're in different departments or different areas. So thinking globally like that maybe doesn't come as naturally. So I could see where there would be some.
But because it doesn't come as naturally, it's all the more reason why it's so important.
Why it should be, yeah.
Seek out ways to have it happen, because we also know how kids learn things is by experimenting and playing with it in different contexts.
Yep.
So if we can be overlapping, that's really powerful. Kelly, you were starting to say something as well.
Yeah, another thing that you brought up just now, Darcy, is the importance of having mentor text from multiple perspectives. And I know Ben has been working with that in the College Career and Community Writers Program.
Oh, cool.
And so I was wondering, Ben, if you could talk about the kinds of mentor texts you use in that program and why the multiple perspectives piece is so important.
I guess I've done some things with, I'm trying to remember the name of the mini unit. But you're looking at like local problems in your community and trying to propose a problem solution style essay. And I know I looked, Casey Olson had a bunch of examples, and that was something that I've used more recently.
It's called the College Career and Community Writers Program. It's a new program by the National Writing Project to support teachers in the teaching of source text-based argument writing. And what's really cool about it is all of the mini units are available free at this website. And if we go to the instructional resources, it started out with secondary, Liz, but you'll be glad to know it's being scaled now to 4th through 6th grade. I'll click on the secondary. It's one of the later units, right, Ben, that you're talking about with community?
Yeah.
So if I scroll through these instructional resources, making the case in an op-ed, coming to terms with opposing viewpoints, focusing on purpose in our audience and public arguments, is that the one?
It might be that, or making civic arguments. It might be that.
Right here, making civic arguments. Oh yeah, research local issues. And then all the skills are listed here. And what's cool is they all come with different text sets, and they're on all kinds of topics, oftentimes not what you would think of Englishy kinds of topics. So we have a lot of social studies teachers using these materials. So we'll put that as a link as well.
That's fabulous. I was also just thinking in terms of shorter things, because sometimes we just want a variety of examples. I don't know if many of you probably use these things, but I am a big lover of Newsela as a great resource. And one of the reasons why I love it is it has basically every genre, so many different topic areas. So if you were looking for some just basic nonfiction writing, like how to write an article, and you want your students to read a couple of examples, something like Newsela will give you a lot of different, you can look at all of your text sets, and they have them for science, literature, social studies, math, and alternatively for younger students, there's Dogo News. And similarly, it has shorter articles, but it's some nice nonfiction writing, possible mentor texts that would also be high interests. You all have been alluding to that either directly or indirectly, that the more opportunities that we can give students to read and write things that appeal and connect to them. Jasmine, you were making that point about having them read people who are like them. That's certainly going to increase that engagement, that purpose for them in that writing. And so a lot of different articles for students to be able to explore and find some things that are of interest to them in these different nonfiction texts. So if you're looking for some quick resources that are designed for students, articles, I sometimes struggle with that because I tend to read things like the New York Times and the Washington Post. And those things, while great, to Liz's point of you're not going to hand that to a kid and say, write like this, because they're not ready for that. That would be like a huge, that's outside their zone of proximal development. Possibly.
Yeah, although the New York Times has the Learning Network, and there is some student writing in that as well. So that's a little bit more accessible. But I do want to shift the conversation a little bit to not just finished pieces of writing as mentor texts, but writing in process. And Liz, this goes back to your talk about the need for elementary resources. And there's an elementary book I've been reading. I don't know if you use this. It's called Learning from Classmates, Using Students' Writing as Mentor Texts. The author is Lisa Eichholt. And she talks about how it's important to find something that's worth modeling or sharing in every child's piece of writing over the course of a writing workshop. Because not just that can be used as a model or for other kids to mentor other kids. But the way that increases motivation and engagement in writing with a student whose writing is shared. So while, you know, we all adore these award winners here, we also need to make every child in the classroom feel like they have something to contribute, that their writing, that they can attain that level of modeling something for somebody else. So I just wanted to get that idea in there too.
Which I think, I'm glad you brought up process, because I'll talk about that too. But one of the things I think is really important is the importance of establishing in your classroom a level of trust so that you can share your pieces of writing with each other. And I think using your peers to help edit, to help revise. We spent a whole month just talking about how you revise, how you do it when you ask for help and feedback, and how you do it when you get feedback. And then we practiced, how do you give feedback? Because you want your feedback to be positive, but yet helpful. So we had to talk about how you would phrase that, because writing is personal. Anything that's put on paper is coming from someone's thoughts and their heart and what they find interesting, what they believe. And no one wants to be told that that's not interesting or that's not good or that's not. And I think when you spend the time and you invest in the time to be able to create a community of writers like that, that makes a huge difference in what you can do with your students all the way into, and right now, into March and April. My students would always, they come back, I'm called the senior editor appointment. I'm the last person that they talk to. And the last person that they come to, and I ask them, well, what did you talk about? Well, what were the changes? What was some of the feedback you got? And to have those conversations with kids gives them way more ownership than me giving them a mentor text. Here's what you would do. Try to do this. I think you have to have some process that goes along with that as well. There's 4 things I have here in the classroom that I have up. I'm just looking at my board here. And it's the magic ingredients of a team of writers in a community. And one is we work together. And the second is we work to improve our writing. The third is we show respect for our community of writers, and we, regardless of ability, everybody has something to contribute, and everyone has something that maybe they tried it and now you know, okay, you know what, I could do that too. And the other is ask for help and assistance from your classmates, because they're really who you're writing and working with, and they're the ones that are going to give you ideas that you might not have thought of. And I just find that so important that we allow kids to have the time to do that. So writing can't just be the writing time. It also has to be time to bounce off ideas with writers. And Kelly knows I met some fantastic people in my time at the writing project, and 3 of those people I still am talking with, and we're part of a writing group. We're doing our own writing and trying to be able to establish. So if we do that as adults, if we want to publish something and we're talking and bouncing ideas off with each other, we should allow our kids to do that as well.
Yes.
That's a nice segue to what are other training opportunities that might exist? You alluded to this a little bit, Kelly, but will you tell us if people are now like, all right, I'm curious, you guys have been talking about some of those trainings. When do those things happen? What training opportunities are available for teachers K-12 and beyond who want to start implementing mentor texts?
So the entry to any National Writing Project site, whether it's the Red River Valley Writing Project here in Eastern North Dakota, or the Northern Plains Writing Project in Western North Dakota, the entry point is the Summer Institute. Okay. And the Summer Institute is an invitational leadership building institute. We do stipend teachers for their time. It's a deep dive into the teaching of writing. people experience and also get to do teaching demonstrations for each other. They're in a writing group, they're getting to write every day. Sometimes in our busy teaching lives, we lose track of our own practice as writers, and the National Writing Project believes that in order to be a good teacher of writing, we should be writers, which makes a lot of sense, but oftentimes it's hard to find the time. So the Summer Institute is when we can revigorate our practice and connect with other teachers. So I just screen shared the flyer for our Summer Institute on our website, and the deadline is April 22nd for this summer. There are also lots of writing retreats and institutes in other states that one can apply for. So as we find out about those, we try to put them on our page or our Facebook page.
Any just final thoughts on why mentor texts are so important and the impact that they have on student learning?
Just with how empowering they can be, and the planes of discussion that they open up, and just like the interest it can ignite in writing and reading, and especially in different content areas, whether it's elementary where it's a bit more integrated and kind of like, yeah, we see where it's at, or if it's high school and it seems disconnected, but it's not. I think mentor texts really, they empower students and they make it feel like this is something I can do. Like, it's not, writing isn't this far away thing, or writing isn't just something we do in English class because we have to do it. It's, no, writing is a part of life, and there are really cool things that can happen if you use mentor texts as models, or as a platform for voices, or just as a way to have fun and be goofy. And it's so nice that mentor texts are adaptable. It's not just a rigid, like, has to be this, has to be that. Like, you can really make it what you want. And then in turn, as the students see you modeling mentor texts, like, they can start to find their own and be like, oh, well, I found like this book or this text or this article. Like what do you think? Could we use this? And it really, like, it uplifts students and it gives them a voice.
And I just look at elementary as planting the seeds of knowing that they have a voice at any time if they choose to, and that their opinion and voice matters, even though they may be a little small person at this time. But I think we kind of tend to forget that at elementary, we can really build a load of confidence in them going forward, because if they have that confidence in themselves that their voice can be heard, then when they get to the secondary, it allows them to take some risks and some opportunities that they may not have chosen to do before. And just to go back to kind of what Jasmine said, it really connects you to the world too. It gives you a place to be in the world, and a place where your bubble can start to affect other people's bubbles. And I like to talk about that with kids, how you have these things in your bubble, but sometimes your bubble will kind of intertwine. And, they know what a Venn diagram is. And they said, kind of like a Venn diagram. I'm like, yeah, like a Venn diagram. It's like watching someone walk into the sunset, holding hands with them and knowing they're going to be okay, because they've got things that are going to show them what they need to do. And mentor texts are that.
I really like how she said that, every kid should have a chance to say, I'm a writer. And I really appreciate what Liz said about the real world importance of writing, and it's a way to connect school and the larger community. And I really appreciate what Ben said about different perspectives too. So yeah, I feel enriched by the conversation. Really want to thank the Alliance for Young Writers and Artists for supporting us and serving as the affiliate for the Scholastic Art and Writing Awards. It's really, their support has meant a lot to what we're able to do for teens and teachers in this state.
That's great. Thank you all for joining today, and hopefully this helps some other teachers implement mentor texts and helps every kid in North Dakota feel like they can be a writer.